Hi there, folks. Eric from Hit Subscribe here with you today, and I am well caffeinated, and I have been on calls for the last 3 hours straight, so I might be a touch manic. I'm going to try to ratchet that energy down a little bit because I am an introvert, and that will exhaust me if I keep going. But I figure I can kind of pull through for one last. And I guess this isn't. It's kind of like a call. One last media related thing before I just kind of retreat into my keyboard and my music. Anyway, all that's not at all relevant to what I do here every week, which is this weekly Q&A about things in the freelancer space. Now, I'm doing another thing like I did last week where I still have some backlog of old questions, but I took something that somebody asked me in our Slack group, would not to be confused with the Circle community, and I reframed that as a question. And actually, we were having this conversation a week or two ago, so now I'm kind of curious as to if I'm even giving remotely the same answer that I did when I was asked about this. This was part of a conversation, so it wasn't asked this neatly and cleanly. But the gist of the question in the conversation was, how would I recommend him or you going from being a gig-based freelancer to somebody with a niche who does value pricing? So for those of you not familiar, value pricing is I guess, more intermediate to advanced level of technique for pricing services, wherein you work with a client during discovery to kind of understand what value your engagement would bring to their business. And then you create a price based on that value, some small fraction of the value you're bringing probably. So like, for instance, as a hypothetical, a good example of value pricing might be, I use this example a lot, but if you're an expert in, let's say, web performance or like ORM performance, maybe you go around helping e-commerce companies fix their database performance, and what you actually get good at doing is going in and assessing, okay, it looks to me like your database performance woes are costing you $1 million a month. So I think it's reasonable for me to come in and do something that would save you $1 million a month if I charge you $100,000 for this. Now, the crucial thing to bear in mind here is that value pricing decouples the cost, what you charge, from the amount of time you spend delivering. So if you have a credible claim that you can help a customer save $1 million a month or increase their revenue by $1 million a month, and you're going to charge them $100,000 for this, they aren't going to care if that takes you 5 hours or 5 weeks. If they believe you that you can help them earn an extra $1 million a month, that won't matter to them. So value pricing is this real sweet spot where and Jonathan Stark, who's an expert in this particular mode of pricing, I think would describe it this way, which is you find high leverage work where the cost, or what it's worth to do, like the minimum amount you would do it for, where what you're charging is way over that minimum amount, but it's also way below what a customer would be willing to pay to have the work done. So you're finding this sweet spot where you both win, because the value of the work to the customer is orders of magnitude more than you would even charge, and what you're charging is a very healthy profit. So the question that came up here, and I think is one that comes up a fair bit in the circles that I'm in, is, you go off on your own, and the kind of de facto way to charge is to say, like, I'm a software engineer and I'm worth $70 an hour because reasons. And then as you're in the market more, maybe you start charging more money through what I had talked about last week, which I'll try to remember to put up a link for, but is kind of like a manufactured leverage. So you gradually increase your hourly rate, but that's an entirely arbitrary thing. And it's also, for any number of reasons, it can be a little bit of a slog over the course of a career, versus establishing a niche, an area of expertise, and pricing flat in some way where you can increase your profits is a good way to build up an equity business. So to kind of circle all the way back here, the question is, how do you bridge this gap? Because it's really easy for a lot of people to reason about how to become a freelancer, not nearly as easy to reason about how to establish a niche and how to start a value price. So I'm going to talk through that here. Now, I guess I should maybe also define niche. And I don't really off the top of my head know what the official definition for this is, but the way that I use it and I've actually written a blog post about this. I differentiate it from something like a specialty or like your secret sauce. So a lot of people will use these terms interchangeably. Like my niche is like the thing I do. Like my niche is Ruby on Rails performance optimization. I don't think of that as a niche because that's just something you do. What I think of when I think of a niche is an area in a market that is unserved or underserved. So, for instance, the aforementioned e-commerce businesses with database performance woes, if you go out and you discover, hey, this is kind of a common problem. A lot of e-commerce businesses are losing money because their database performance or their ORM performance is bad. What you've just discovered is a gap or a soft spot in the market. There is this problem that people have, and nobody's really addressing it, or at least not sufficiently, or it wouldn't be an ongoing problem. So the distinction I make here, um, being good at the database optimization piece is not a niche. Substandard database performance costing you money presents the opportunity for a niche. A niche is a problem that somebody else has. It isn't about you or what you do. It's about patterns among a particular set of customers or businesses or whatever in problems that they have that are going unsolved or insufficiently addressed. So that's a really important distinction to make, because when you start to think about it this way, the niche and the value pricing kind of go hand in hand. And the reason I say that is um, when you think about somebody who has a problem and you start to identify a pattern, like, oh, this customer has this problem. Hey, so do these people. I'm going to go around and I'm going to solve this problem over and over again repeatedly for different customers. Well, the more you solve a similar problem, number one, the more of an expert you become in that problem, but also the more of an expert you become in everything going around that around that problem. So yes, you start to learn about how to use an ORM to improve database performance, but you also start to learn what kind of customers tend to have this problem. How do you know that they have this problem? You'll learn signs that they have the problem that even they're not aware of. So you could actually go and speak and say, hey, you might not know that you have this problem. Here are 10 signs that you do, and that would be interesting to them. So you become an expert in detecting, diagnosing, prescribing around the problem. You become an expert in the follow-up after solving the problem. You generally become an expert in the solving of this problem. Once you become an expert in the solving of a problem, you get much better at reasoning about the expensiveness of that problem. Okay, so one of the things I know now is here are a bunch of signs that you have this problem. Also, here's how much this is typically costing a business that does 10 million a month in revenue. Here's how much it's typically costing one that does 100 million a month in revenue. So you start to have a much easier time going in and ascertaining the economic value of solving this problem. So to recap here, from a broad perspective, a niche and value pricing, or at least savvy pricing in the market, maybe you're doing cost plus, which is here's what it costs me to solve, and I'm going to tack on a figure. But reasoning about good ways to price the solution to the problem and a deep understanding of the problem go hand in hand. So what's really required if you want to go from freelancing to having a niche and doing things like value pricing and building an equity business is that you have to start to think about some kind of problem. You have to pay attention to a problem and patterns, and that means reps or at bats. It means you have to be solving similar-ish problems over and over again. And so let me contrast that with what the average freelancer typically does. Like you hang out your shingle and you say, I kind of do whatever as long as you want Ruby on Rails and you have money. So I helped an e-commerce business that was built on Rails kind of recently. Then I went over to the startup that was doing, a prototype implementation, and I helped them with their prototype. And then I went and helped a SaaS, improve certain things and ship a few features. And then I went out and participated in this bug bash for this old desktop app that they had built, and so on and so forth. Now, what you're doing is you're just wandering around doing completely unrelated things. And that is a case study in how not to build a niche. The thing you're fixing is I do this implementation that probably in the end nobody really cares that much about, Rails. So I do any kind of work as long as Rails is somehow related. Nobody has a problem where they wake up one morning and they're like, gosh, I wish I had someone to do Rails. people do wake up in the morning and say, gosh, my business is hemorrhaging money, or gosh, I just had a security breach or whatever. So the generalist gig-based freelancing is typically extremely you focused when you get down to it. I don't care about any of your problems or this or that. As long as you pay me $70 an hour and I get to write Rails, what do I care? That is the freelancer mindset. And I don't mean to sound like I'm bashing this overly. I'm kind of doing it that way to illustrate the difference in mindset. So I don't imagine you actually don't care at all about your clients if you're doing gig-based freelancing. But at the core of it, it's just, what does it matter to me? You're paying my rate and you want Rails, and that's what I do. You have to start thinking in the opposite way of that. And it is not the easiest thing to do, but you need to start to think about what are the kind of common problems that I seem to be solving. And once you identify a pattern in those, you start to pay attention to that and try to solve similar problems and gather more and more data about the things around those problems so that you can get better at recognizing them and continuing to help in a similar kind of way. And this is identifying a niche. So I've got some notes up here. I'm going to talk about some tactics for how to do this that are a little more practical, because for right now, I've just been talking at a high level about mindset shift. But first, I think maybe I'll talk about like what I wouldn't do. So the thing that I wouldn't do is just kind of arbitrarily pick a niche. Like you've just read some of the many sites out there or something about how to pick a niche. And it's like, think about what you enjoy, think about this, think about that. And so you go through a list and you decide, you know what, I think I'm going to help mid-market companies in this part of the world that sell this kind of thing do DevOps better or something. I would not just sit down and kind of decide arbitrarily on some niche. It won't be especially effective, and there's no reason for you to necessarily be doing it. What I would do instead is think more and audit your past more, but I'll get into that in a moment. So the first thing I would say is don't just decide that you're going to be in some niche now. You need kind of like a credible entry story into what you're doing. You need to gradually build over the course of time towards solving a similar problem. And you should really have some, actual credible instances of solving that problem instead of just deciding that you're now the person who helps beer companies save money or something. Another thing that I wouldn't do is go right out of the gate with, let's call it content marketing or thought leadership, where you're like, I need a niche. I want to be in business for myself. And so what I'm going to do is start blathering on LinkedIn ad nauseum about this thing until somebody somewhere believes that I know what I'm talking about. There is something I think to be said for if you set up a blog or a channel for content creation and you start doing it, people think of you as an authority faster than you probably think of yourself as one. So that's true. You can kind of manufacture some cred that way. But I'd be really careful about this because I've done this one in a video too before. The whole fake it till you make it thing is just, it's a failure pattern for you to decide this is my niche and I am now good at it. And I am going to create content that supports that, because most likely what you're creating is shallow performative content that's not a very good look, and it's probably not really going to fool people. And it's probably going to hurt your credibility if you do stuff like this. So I guess what I'm getting at is there is no shortcut. The fact that you feel like quitting your 9-to-5 job and you think it's a best practice to have a niche and credibility and expertise and to value price doesn't mean that you can just do that and sort of make it up as you go. You need to build towards solving a problem. You can get there faster, and I'll get into that in a moment in what to do, but there's no real true shortcut that completely cuts off the process and lets you instantly have a niche and instantly be able to value price and speak credibly and market yourself. You need to build that through hard-won experience. So instead of lecturing you, let me switch into some things that I would do kind of in rough order, I guess. First, I would audit your work history, both employed and freelance, and look for common threads. So if you're a Rails developer and you're working on web applications a lot, what have you historically been doing? Is it all over the map, or does it turn out that there are some common patterns? Have you done a lot of work for e-commerce companies? Have you done a lot of work for like online video games? You can start to look for patterns in the kind of companies that you've worked for. You can start to look for patterns in the kind of problems you've been brought in to solve. And you can use that as the basis for brainstorming. The reason that's a good place to start is because you already have some credible experience there. The next thing I would think about doing is taking that thread of credible experience, and it can be loosely related, and then queuing up a market research tour or a listening tour. So, what this typically involves is trying to actually go back and figure out when you were working on these things, what problem were you being brought in to solve? So it'd be pretty typical for somebody to bring you in as a Rails developer and add you to their like core staff to have more features delivered or something like that, or it might be typical for you to be brought in to do some kind of temporary initiative, like migrating from solution X to solution Y or whatever the case may be. And if you're just doing gig-based app dev or something, your discovery process, in as much as it exists, probably doesn't involve much beyond just identifying the technical issues with the problem to be solved. So like who's buying the IDE and like how do I get access and where's the repository? You're just trying to identify things that would keep you from like doing the app dev. You're probably not in the habit of asking questions like, why are you doing this? How do you know that there's going to be a return on investment, and so on and so forth? So once you've started to identify patterns and threads, I would go back to old freelance customers and or former employers and have conversations with them, the folks that hired you are in a management capacity, and try to understand why they hired you, what they were hoping for from you, and so on and so forth. It would be beyond the scope of this video, which is already going to be fairly long, to kind of tell you how to do that discovery. I think I've written about it in the past, but you would want to brainstorm some questions that start to get to the underlying value, the problem being solved, the thing that's really worth paying for here, and it isn't your labor. So you start out kind of brainstorming common threads, and then you go and have conversations with those people where you kind of archaeologically reconstruct the value, the reason that you were hired, the expensive problem being solved. Then I would do some introspection as to how the work you did contributed to that, or in the case that it actually turned out not to be very successful, failed to contribute, and why. So how does the work that you're used to doing actually contribute to the successful outcome that somebody cares about? Now, you can start to extend that listening tour and market research beyond just people that you've worked with. So as you get a hypothesis and you find some patterns there, you can start to go out and reach out to potential prospects theoretically and say, hey, I don't have anything to offer. I'm not trying to sell you anything because I don't have anything baked enough to sell, but I am trying to understand whether it's worth developing a solution here. I'm thinking of, kind of creating a specialized practice, but I want to see if I'm going to be wasting my time first. And then expanding the network of people of whom you're asking questions to start to understand more and more about this problem. In parallel with that, I would think about either starting a brand new website if you already have one, or putting up a landing page on your site where you offer some kind of productized service related to this discovery effort. So to make this a little bit more tangible, I'm going to go back and draw on the ORM e-commerce model, assuming that's a thing. You might have realized, hey, I've done a lot of work for e-commerce companies, and a pretty common problem here seemed to be that I was brought in to like do stuff to the ORM, which was, misbehaving, and then they seem to realize some gains. So you go back, you have market research conversations confirming that or disproving it or whatever. You also start to have conversations with other e-commerce vendors. Hey, are you having performance problems? Is it costing you revenue? Do you think your database is partially responsible? How would you know if it were? So you're asking questions like that. In parallel, or a little bit after you've started that, I would recommend standing up either an entire site or a productized service landing page on your site where you say, I'm going to do, for $2,000, I will do an e-commerce ORM audit where I go in and do this 20-point inspection, looking for a bunch of things to tell you whether or not it might be worth pursuing fixes with your ORM to boost revenue or reduce your costs or whatever. Crucially, the thing I would stand up there is an inexpensive offering that's a credit card swipe for a vendor like that. It is something that is pretty low risk in relation to your day-to-day gig-based freelancing, which is probably you working for 40 hours a week for like one or two clients. So it has to be something that you can execute in nights and weekends in addition to what you're currently doing, if you don't want to jeopardize that. It has to be something that's easy for the client to say yes to and fairly low risk because you're new at this. And it has to be something where you might even show them this $2,000 landing page, and then just to get one or two at bats at this, say, I want to do this for free for one or two companies. If I do this and it's valuable to you, would you mind writing me a testimonial? That's all I'm asking. You need a credible explanation why you're doing it for free, or you seem like a huckster. But hey, I want to roll this out as an offering, but not until I've done an alpha run. Very credible reason to do it. So I would combine all of those things together to start getting a productized service out there that's inexpensive and low risk for everybody involved, but definitely starts to build you credible expertise in this very specific thing that solves an actual need for the client. Now you've laid the foundation to start getting into the habit of solving this same problem or variations thereof again and again. As you go, you will want to be receptive to feedback on the productized service. You're almost certainly going to need to tune it, the scope, the deliverables, etc. You might start to introduce a product ladder. But the crucial thing here is you're getting a foot in the door and you're solving similar problems over and over again. Now, as you're doing that, you can start to write about that or speak about that, document your findings, write case studies. And this starts to build up your marketing and your credible expertise in the space, which makes it easier to win more business. Now, the very end of all of this is going to be you are adept enough at doing this to value price. So after enough assessments of the e-commerce ORM situation, you start to learn all the telltale signs of, oh yeah, I could do an engagement here and save you a bunch of money. This is when you can start to say, I think that if we do all of these things, you will realize X dollars of value approximately. So here's my proposal for Y, which is maybe like 1/20th or 1/100th of X. And that is kind of in a nutshell how I would work my way towards having a niche and towards value pricing. It's a low risk path, especially if you stand up that one productized service at first, because as that gains traction, you can start to sunset your old generalist clients and move towards doing your niche more and more. So, there are some things like I had mentioned, for instance, I wanted to close the loop on and saying there are some shortcuts you can take to make this happen faster, but none of these are just start blathering about ORMs if you knew what you were talking about. So don't do that. But doing a bunch of listening tours, you could document that and start writing up, like, hey, I'm not an expert in this, but here are the problems people are talking about. So you can start to use content in a certain way to start, talking about this more ahead of time if you don't pretend at knowledge you don't have. You can get there quicker by discounting or making the offerings free so that you can write case studies sooner, so that you can talk about and share that history with other prospective clients. So there are ways that you can sort of reduce the lead time on having the productized service and having the eventual value pricing without being a huckster. It's just doing things like, having a free offering because you don't have as much experience, or finding ways to discover the niche faster via market research, and finding ways that you can be helpful in the space without being the foremost expert. Those are all valid things to do. So anyway, I hope all of that helps. And yeah, I will catch you next time.